So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Complete Streets program. And I think if it's okay with you guys, I'll turn it basically right over. And we are a small group, so feel free. If you've got background noise, go ahead and mute yourself. But, you know, conversation, let's have interactive conversations here with Maureen. She will tell us when it's time to jump in. But yeah, I think that I'm excited about having a good conversation. We've got a few more people sneaking in there. So hi, Janet.
Awesome. Hi.
All right. So,
Okay.
Very good. So with no further ado, welcome to Complete Streets. And Maureen, I'm going to let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for everyone being here today. Let's see if I can get my screen to move. It's not moving.
Oh, Tammy. Hi, Tammy.
There we go. Okay, so my agenda that I put together was I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. I'll talk about what Complete Streets are, a little bit about the history, how to develop a policy for your community and why it's important, some implementation ideas and resources, because how to pay for that is a really important thing. And then I will do a little bit on how to assess your community for walkability using a walk audit. And I've left hopefully a little bit of time for questions and answers, but if you have something, feel free to jump in. So who am I? I am Maureen Blanchard. I am the project director on a New York State Department of Health grant, Creating Healthy Schools and Communities. And I work out of SUNY Cobleskill Research Foundation. I have been here for 8 years doing this work and working on Complete Streets. I got interested in it because I've spent a lot of my time driving around in my previous job, looking at roads and saying, is this a road I would feel comfortable walking, biking, or running along? And realizing that families that I was working with at the time, in a lot of cases, didn't have a place where they could get out and walk. I'm a mom of 3 adult children, one of who is currently at my house awaiting her next part of her life. She just is graduating medical school next week and will be leaving for her residency in mid-May. I have 3 rescue corgis currently. Let's see, they are Bella, Wanda, and Mindy going across my couch. I am a runner and a recreational bicyclist. I'm really happy to be doing this with you today. So what are Complete Streets? Basically, Complete Streets are streets that are safe for all users, including but not limited to cars, trucks, buses, pedestrians, bicyclists, and people who are using personal mobility devices. They support local economies by improving walking traffic on main streets. They can improve sustainability of roads by increasing the width of the shoulder that will help maintain the road condition for a longer period of time. And they can improve the environment by reducing our reliance on using a motor vehicle. And I have an example of that at the end of the presentation. Complete Streets are also safe for all users and abilities, whether it's young parents with toddlers and strollers, school-age children who walk to school, elderly who may use walkers, canes, those using crutches, and those in wheelchairs or personal mobility devices. And we can see in these pictures, we've got kids walking to school along a pretty busy road. The picture of the elderly woman was actually taken during a walk audit out in Richfield Springs. She was walking back from Price Chopper with her groceries, and she would walk about every 10 or 15 feet and stop and just stand there and rest. So after that, we decided we'd put in some benches along the way, and so she now has some places to stop. The road picture up on top is actually New York Route 4 between Fort Anne and Whitehall. and it shows that a widened shoulder for bicyclists. So it made it a little bit safer for bicyclists. So complete streets allow users to travel and get to their destinations. If we see the man in the wheelchair who's trying to cross the street, he's got a great ramp on one side, but we look across the street and how does he get back onto a sidewalk? There is no ramp on the other side. The other picture is a picture of my husband out in Rochester at Tim Hortons, where they put in this great crosswalk to get from the sidewalk to Tim Hortons. And then they put landscaping in between the sidewalk and the crosswalk. So he could get all the way across, but couldn't access the sidewalk. So we can see that people don't always plan how to get where they need to go. So a little bit on the history. Complete Streets is not new. It's been around since 1971 when Oregon passed their first complete street policy. They were the first in the US. In 1984, Florida adopted a policy. In 90, we see the Americans with Disabilities Act that really looked at how do we make things accessible for people. In 1998, we have the Transportation Equity Act of the 21st century. In 2003, bicycle advocates suggested replacing the phrase routine accommodations in a lot of these policies with complete streets, and then worked to form a complete street task force with participation from AARP, the American Planning Association, American Public Transportation Association, American Society for Landscape Architects, and the American Heart Association. So we can see a really broad basis of people supporting complete streets and looking at how it can be beneficial for communities. In 2005, we see the formation of the National Complete Street Coalition. In 2011, so 30 years after, 40 years after Oregon passed their policy, New York finally passed a policy. New York's policy states that basically states that state, county, and local agencies need to consider the convenience and mobility of all users when developing transportation projects that receive federal and state funding. It only needs to consider it. It doesn't need to implement it. So we actually have probably one of the weaker policies when you look at other states. There are a total of 448 regional and local policies. 27 states have adopted policies, including the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. In New York State, there are 133 communities that have policies or resolutions. 16 counties have policies. And you can find all that on the New York State Department of Transportation website. In Otsego County, we currently have 3 towns, 4 villages in the city of Oneonta with adopted policies. So we are starting to make some inroads within the county.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
When Cooperstown did their plan, this is Martha.
Yeah.
It was before, I believe, the blue parking lot and all the signage for tourists to park right there before you enter the village or as you enter the village. There was talk of doing some kind of a walkability something to Main Street. And I thought it had something to do with the railroad at the time, but I don't think that ever happened. Does anybody know? Did they just use the sidewalks? Figure people could follow the sidewalks, even though there are no directional signs telling them how to walk to? I mean, it should be obvious, I guess, but it's certainly not going to be obvious to all tourists.
Right, and I don't know if they ever did anything. I do know they did adopt a complete street policy back in 2015, 2016. It was right after my grant started because I had met with the village, with Bassett Hospital, to see if we could do something, and they already had one in process. But I think our showing an interest helped move it along, maybe.
Yeah, I think, and what got me was the underlined consider. I think I probably misread that at the time and thought that they had to do something.
Yeah,
But I see they didn't.
No, unfortunately, no.
Yeah.
So the Americans with Disability Act actually has been one of the ADA has been really one of the strong proponents of having complete streets, and they put a lot of their language into really helping to develop what complete streets should look like, especially since we're looking at public accommodations and transportation being accessible. So as we're looking at complete streets in communities, we're going to look at, do sidewalks have curb cuts with ramps? Do you have a plan for changing that over? And this is becoming more and more important because there are more communities that are getting sued and are actually getting fined for not having the infrastructure in place or not having a plan and following a plan to upgrade infrastructure. So all that's becoming more and more important. AARP.
Maureen,
Yes.
Quick question. It's Gary. You were talking about the fact that it's not compulsory in general, even if you have a policy, but when the ADA is involved, does it become compulsory?
The ADA has come, if people put make a complaint that a community is not compliant, then yes, fines can be levied against a community. We're not, more so sidewalk or other infrastructure, playgrounds. I know within New York State, the city of Watertown was sued by a mom because she had a 5-year-old child with, I think, cerebral palsy who could not get around on the playground. It wasn't accessible for kids with, he needed a walker. And so she sued the city of Watertown for their playgrounds as well as their sidewalks. And Watertown is saying, no, we meet the guidelines. We're doing as much as we're required to do, even though the parent says it's not really accessible. Sidewalks are probably a bigger piece of the infrastructure. New York City was fined billions of dollars for not having the curb cuts and all that. And this is actually another whole presentation that I was hoping to bring somebody from ADA in to talk to communities, because I hear from a lot of communities that if we don't do any work, we don't need to upgrade our facilities. So they're more hesitant about doing any kind of work.
So if somewhere like the city is fined, is that a one-time thing, or can it be a recurring?
It can be
issue?
a recurring issue, but usually the fines are pretty high. So once a community is fined, they all of a sudden say it's better for us to implement
Right.
and at least work towards getting our plan in place and doing some work. So yeah. AARP, every one of our communities up here in central New York is seeing the age of our population increase. And so how do we keep our residents able to stay within their communities that they've lived in for all these years? So AARP has been a huge partner in this movement. And as we get through this presentation, I'll share that, yes, they are one of the funders of a lot of local projects. So it's always a good idea to keep an eye out for them, but they've also put together some great resources that anybody can get for free. So America Walks is another organization that has great resources. They sponsor webinars almost every month on community walkability. They also do every year a walking college, which trains walkability advocates how to work with their community to improve walkability within their community. My grant actually worked with America Walks last year, and we had a walking college to train advocates. I worked with the village and town of Richfield Springs, and worked with a community member within the village and town, as well as New York State DOT Region 9 on the walking college, and we ended up with a collaborative action plan for the community to look at how we can improve implementation and improve safety for walkability and bicycle safety in the community. A little known one is Orton Family Foundation. I believe they're out of Maine, and they will come in and train community advocates on how to not just walkability, but how to really bring back your community economically, and how do we revitalize communities. They also will do webinars and have lots of resources out there that people can use for free. And I've sat in on some of their webinars, and they're really pretty interesting. Policy development. Why do we really need a policy? Policies guide the work that is important in a community. It guides your development. It communicates with stakeholders what your priorities are. Every one of our communities has county, state roads that are going through it. So how do we work with the county DOT, DPW, and New York State DOT to get what we need? It looks at businesses that want to enter, and it kind of sets how you want a business who's coming into the community to build their building and develop their site. Where's the parking going to be? What's the access going to be like? It looks at zoning. Having a policy also can help you with funding opportunities. Currently, New York State DOT, when they have funding for road improvement, if a community has a complete street policy, it gives you bonus points. However, as the number of communities that have policies increases, not having a policy is going to reduce your chances of getting that funding. So it's really important to make sure that you're not going to lose out on funding by not having a policy. So I've got two pictures here of Walgreens Pharmacy. Both are actually out in Wisconsin, and my photos are courtesy of Mark Fenton, who's a national expert who we had come to Otsego County in 2016 or 2017, I can't remember which year it was, to do a presentation. The top Walgreens was built because the community didn't say we want anything different, where the parking lot is out in front and it makes it more difficult for somebody who's going to walk or bike to Walgreens to get to the store safely. The bottom Walgreens was built within a community that said, wait a second, we have a policy. We want this Walgreens to be accessible to people who are walking there or taking the bus. And so they put the entrance right up at the sidewalk. Having a policy and insisting on this gets you what you want. By not insisting, you're going to get the cookie cutter version of what a company usually does. So there are several different types of policies. The basic one is a resolution of support, which is very limited in its ability to enforce what you're looking for. Basically, a resolution of support is really only applicable for the elected officials who are in office when it's adopted, unless it's supported every year after that. And I'm starting to see some of that. An ordinance or a local law is more legally binding. It can change the codes for the community, but it does take a public hearing to get it approved. But it's definitely then on the books and more enforceable. Comp plans, sidewalk plans, transportation plans are all amazing things to have. They are not legally binding, but they can put into play designs and ideas that a community wants. And I always say that having plans are beneficial so that when funding is available, you have an idea of what you want to do and have almost shovel-ready projects. So you're more likely to get your funding. The Complete Streets Local Policy Workbook is a free workbook put out by Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition that basically will take a community step by step how to devise a policy. And I'm going to go through that quickly. I did send it to Amy, and she can send it out by email to anybody who's interested. It really is pretty easy to follow. It looks at 10 elements to develop a strong policy. And the first one is a vision for your community. What is your community vision? Do you have one in any of the documents that you have currently? How do you want new people or outsiders to view your community? So in Richfield Springs, I got involved with them when they were working on their joint comprehensive plan. And the vision statement in that was that the village and town will work collaboratively to create a thriving economy around our rural heritage, vibrant village, Canandaigua Lake, while protecting and preserving natural and aesthetic resources. With these foundations, we will preserve and develop over our significant historical treasures, expand our diverse cultural backgrounds, and continue to invest in our recreational assets. These invaluable resources will be the cornerstones for our community to sustain itself for years to come. So when we developed a complete street policy for the village, I took the ideas from that vision statement and included that in the village's complete street policy, where we're going to create a community with a thriving economy that supports and is supported by the rural agricultural heritage, environmental resources around Canandaigua Lake and the historic village. Resources are the cornerstone of the community and must be taken into consideration in planning for development in the village, so that when we're looking at complete streets, we're taking all of that into consideration. And when we did the collaborative action plan with the walking college, again, I revised the vision statement. The town of Richfield and the village of Richfield Springs want to create a community with a thriving economy that supports and is supported by the rural agricultural heritage, the environmental resources around Canandaigua Lake, and the historic village. We want to create a friendly community where neighbors know each other and are able to move around the community safely, whether it is walking, bicycling, rolling, or in a motorized vehicle. We would like to increase safety for active transportation and reduce the reliance on vehicles for local trips, including school, local stores, or to community parks and resources. We hope that increasing active transportation will also impact the economy in the community and establish a thriving Main Street business district. We would like to see walking routes established to the school and to local parks and community resources, as well as recreational walking routes. So while we took the essence of, we carried it through into each vision statement of each document that we had. The second point is that it specifies all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, transit passengers of all ages and abilities, as well as trucks, buses, and automobiles. I will caution you that in Otsego County, I think you need to include agricultural equipment as well as Amish, because those modes of transportation also impact safety on our roads. So do you have a school in the community with students that could be walking or do walk? Do you have parks, stores? What are your community resources? How do people travel in your community? What would an outsider need to be aware of? You know, the Amish, the agricultural equipment that's slow moving, wide loads. Do you feel safe walking or bicycling along the roads in your community? Do you have households that can't afford a car and either walk, bike, or rely on public transportation, or have to rely on others to get them there? So how are people getting around in your community? So the policy.
A question?
Sure.
I was thinking about the things we have going through the hamlet of Hartwick, and tractor trailers is one of them. We don't really encourage them, but certainly they do go through. Does it open you up if you put tractor trailers in there and then we have the fracking people wanting to come through because we put tractor trailers in our list?
That would be a question for an attorney. I'm not willing to say yes or no on that, but I would definitely check with an attorney. And I don't know that you can deny a tractor trailer coming through unless the road doesn't have the base for it, but I'm not sure. So, but that would definitely be a question I would ask an attorney.
Okay.
The third point is that it applies to both new and retrofit construction projects, including the design, planning, maintenance, and operation for the entire right-of-way. Again, we see Route 4 where state DOT put in a wider shoulder to enable bicyclists to be able to ride. And that was a retrofit. And really all it was is widening the shoulder. And we see the new one where, oops, somebody in Rochester didn't take into consideration that when you have a crosswalk, you need to be able to access. So there are things that you can do that are major projects, and there are things that you can do that are not so major. And we'll get into some of that when we get into implementation. You're allowed to make exceptions that are specific and set a clear procedure that require high-level approval for exceptions. There are going to be places where you can't implement complete streets and it can't be safe for all users. So how do we make those determinations, and who is it that gets to make that decision, and what comes into play? So another thing is that you should probably keep a log of that so that in the future, if somebody comes and says, well, why isn't this done? You have the ability to say, oh yes, it was brought up that when that was happening, it wasn't considered safe to, you know, widen the shoulder. There wasn't the room there to do it because of drainage ditches or whatever. So be aware of having those exceptions, and how are we going to track them and keep a log of them. Encourages street connectivity and aims to create a comprehensive, integrated, connected network for all modes. So we all know James Lettuce Highway down in Oneonta, that there are frequently people walking along there, and safety is a huge concern through there. I know that the city and the town have both put in grants or a joint grant to do some work on that, and they have not received funding as of yet. But I do think that the funding will be coming sooner rather than later. So, you know, again, that's going to be a higher cost project. The other picture is from Ridgefield Springs, where over the winter the snow piled up at the corner, and people who were walking couldn't access the sidewalk to get over that little bridge and were forced out into the road. So in that case, maybe it's just a plowing issue, a snow clearing issue. But do the sidewalks connect? Do they go someplace, or do they just kind of end at a dead end with, nowhere to go? Do they get blocked by snow? Can you get from a bus stop to the where the bus is going to pick you up, or is there piles of snow in the way? You need to think of those kinds of things. Your policy is adoptable by all agencies to cover all roads. This is a perfect example in Oneonta, where one of the most dangerous intersections in the city. We've seen a lot of fatalities there. It takes the city working with New York State DOT, because 2 of the roads are state roads and 2 of the roads are city roads. So they all need to work together on it. And as you're developing a policy, it's probably a good idea to include DOT and county DPW or county planning to figure out exactly how everybody's going to work together. What I have found is that if I include DOT specifically in any conversations that I'm having with communities, if I include them right up front, I'm more likely to get cooperation, and we're able to solve a problem quicker, rather than us coming up with a solution and then going to DOT saying, we've got the solution, we want you to do it. It definitely works better if we have them at the table. And directs the use of the latest and best design criteria and guidelines while recognizing the need for flexibility in balancing user need. And I included a picture of a traffic circle because everybody hates them, but sometimes they are the best use for getting the safety. And so within the workbook, it gives language for how to include this idea legally. And so that's one of the best things about this workbook, is it does give you language that you can just copy right out of. And directs that complete streets.
Maureen,
yes.
Maureen, as a driver, I love roundabouts. But as a walker, I could see that it could be a nightmare.
And Gary, most drivers can't stand them. And I've switched the slide, and now we have a small roundabout that I think is probably more acceptable to communities, but I think that there are ways to do roundabouts for pedestrian safety as well. And so I think it needs to be a community context to be able to develop what a roundabout or a traffic circle is going to look like. And in this picture, we see the bottom right picture is a parklet. It's actually up in Gloversville that the community built with, I think it was using pallets. The bike frame up on top was, again, courtesy of Mark Fenton. He and his wife donated the funding to, and a group of students designed and built the bike rack. His community, the school, are the Sharks, I think. So the kids designed a shark bike rack. And that's at their library. So we can do things that are specific to our communities and will help us out. We established performance standards with measurable outcomes. This is a picture from Hamburg, New York, of some work that was done by DOT, and they put in bike racks. They did put in a traffic circle. They put in some crosswalks at the other end, and really DOT wanted to do some work to make the road wider and faster. The community said, no, we want it slower. We want safety for bicyclists and pedestrians, and the community got their way. Your policy should include specific next steps, have a to-do list that you're going to have, you know, meeting places, send out invitations, develop ideas, form committees, and all that kind of stuff. So that you have an idea of how to take your policy and make it a living document. We don't want a policy that's going to sit on a shelf and everybody ignores it. We really want you to be able to develop a policy that fits your community and is really a usable thing, a living document. So PPS has developed this idea of the power of 10. Communities that have 10 different places in it, places of interest in it, are more likely to attract people. Places that have 10 areas within it are more likely to attract people to use it. So I have pictures of the co-op in Richfield Springs, which did a flower arranging workshop. They sell things. They've got a workspace. They've got a coffee area. So they've got a lot of different things going on. The park, which has the basketball court, the playground, the farmer's market. They've got the fountain that's got some historic information. It's used by lots of different organizations. It's more likely going to get used if it has more things going on in the community. So I want you to think about that as you're working in your communities. And how can we increase usage in different areas, or are there things that are used for one thing that maybe could be used for lots of other things, and can we make them walkable? So implementation can be very expensive if we're talking road design, or it can be less expensive if we're just talking some smaller things. It can be signage. It can be putting amenities out. It could be identifying destinations. It can be infrastructure. It can be painting lines and moving a line over to make room for a bike lane. It can be developing a parking area so that you, instead of having parking on Main Street, you have a parking lot and you get people to park there and have them walk. It can be a total redesign of the road. In Delhi, they put up this information kiosk, and they've got a couple of them in the community that give lots of information on them. The co-op in Richfield puts out a table and chair set so that it makes it so that people want to come and sit, and the sidewalks are nice and wide. In Delhi, again, they decorate their poles and they put out planters that, again, protects pedestrians and makes them feel a little bit safer. Radar speed signs slow traffic down, so it makes bicyclists and pedestrians feel a little bit safer. If we can get them going the speed limit instead of exceeding the speed limit, it just improves safety for everybody. And the yield to pedestrian and the crosswalk sign that I have in the top corner, if you have a community where you can put it in the middle of the road, in between two lanes of traffic, it will definitely slow traffic because it just is seen as an impediment in the road. The ones with the wider bases tend to work better than the ones that get stuck into the ground. Those seem to get used more for target practice. These with the wider bases will do a little bit more damage to a vehicle. I don't recommend putting them out in the middle of winter. DOT does not like to plow around them, and they will get hit and moved. In the summer, when it's nice, if you have something going on and you're trying to slow traffic down, they work really well. A lot of times we can do things that are quick wins. We tend to call these the lighter, quicker, cheaper projects. Tactical urbanism is another word, or pop-up projects. They're short-term, low-cost solutions that can have an impact. Again, if you're doing it on a state road, you need to have DOT permits, but not everything needs to be done on state roads. And not everything needs to be temporary. You know, getting DOT when they're paving to widen the shoulder a little bit is an easy thing. It will actually help make the road last longer than if you pave a narrower shoulder. And if you backfill, again, it helps last longer. Putting benches up around the community, especially on the way to, where, you know, between housing and stores, will help promote people who may not walk because they can't walk that far to be able to walk and be able to sit down. The middle picture is a bicycle, and it's a two-way bicycle route along one side of the road. You don't see them here as much as you do in more urban areas, but you do see the bump out in the bottom picture. That's from the village of Cooperstown. And again, theoretically, that could be taken up in the wintertime and put back in the spring. So that's something to consider. The top right-hand picture, you see a blue and black crosswalk. That's actually in Utica, using a local product. That's Ruby Lake glass. And that was the blonde in the picture is a co-worker of mine out of another grantee in the Utica area, and they put that on one of the city streets in Utica. My understanding was Ruby Lake Glass was going to be doing some work with Cooperstown on crosswalks, and I love their product. It is a recycled glass from computer screens and television screens that is crushed very finely. It has some reflectivity, but it also has lots of different colors. So I think it's really good. It is not, colors are not allowed on state roads or any roads that receive state funding at this point, unless you're going with like a brick red. So again, Americans with Disability Act, if you're doing work, sidewalks need to be a minimum of 36 inches. They can go down to 32, but for no more than 2 feet. We want to make sure that people can get by with wheelchairs and walkers. So cross slope on ramps can't exceed 2% and running slope of 5%. CHIPS funding can be used for sidewalks that are within the highway right-of-way and are not on private property, but they do need to meet ADA standards. So if a community had CHIPS funding and wanted to use it for sidewalks, they could, as long as they're meeting those guidelines.
Is 36-inch ADA compliant?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. This is a picture from Hamburg, New York, that I was mentioning. And when they redesigned their street, you can see the bicycle lane, you can see the crosswalk. I might put more flashing lights at the crosswalk now, because you're coming around corners, and I'd want to make sure you could see the pedestrians that are there, but they're making accommodations for bicyclists and pedestrians, and they've actually seen an increase in bicyclists and pedestrians, as well as shopping in their main streets. Since COVID-19, urban areas are seeing a reduced number of vehicles on the roads. We are also seeing that locally. I had Richfield Springs, who has a radar speed sign, look up the data for me. They are seeing a 50% reduction in the number of cars on the road where the radar speed sign is posted. However, they are seeing an increase in the speeds that vehicles are using, because vehicles are not getting the feedback from other drivers to slow down. They're going much faster. We're also seeing more pedestrians and bicyclists out there. Urban areas are seeing more crashes and more fatal crashes. So just something to be aware of, that yes, we are seeing less traffic but higher speeds. And this is actually the perfect time, if a community had some ideas they wanted to try them and see if it worked to slow traffic down. Here's a crosswalk that people painted. They also did, you can see the bump out with the cones. This is something that's very easy for a community to try on a temporary basis. All that paint will wash away, and it's really easy to take those cones up and have the intersection go back to the way it was before. But you can get feedback from the community that could then influence funding to do a bump out or a redesign of that intersection, if you had the data to show that yes, cars slowed down and pedestrians felt safer and more pedestrians were using it when this was in place. So a good, very easy to do, very cheap to try it. Little parklet that somebody tried using some, roll out rugs, some tires, table and chairs. Again, I wouldn't necessarily want to leave that out, especially on a state road for any length of time. And yes, you would need to have permits to do it, but something that you could try. Protected bike lane, where you put the bicycle lane inside parking area. I would rather see bike lane on the inside than outside in the car door zone, because I think that puts bicyclists between car doors and traffic. I think more people would find it safer to travel closer to the sidewalk, but that's something that communities aren't really comfortable with. And when you start taking away parking spaces, most communities are like, no, you can't do that. So just something to be aware of. Bogota, Colombia, they started this thing called Ciclovia, where they close the streets and make pedestrians right of way for like a Sundays. So no cars are allowed on it. You can bike, you can walk, you can have a community dinner and close the road down and all that. I remember, I grew up in Westchester County, downstate. The Bronx River Parkway was closed on Sundays, and it was open for bicyclists and pedestrian. And that was back in the 70s. So this idea has been around for a while. Many of our communities do not have safe places for kids to ride bikes and really to learn to ride bikes. This may be a way of doing some community outreach and getting people to know each other, as well as allowing kids to have the opportunity to learn to ride a bike or rollerblade or, do things within your community. And it could really be a way of bonding your community together as well. Resources, Better Block Foundation can come in and work with the community to identify ideas that you might want to implement going forward, and they actually will help you try a pop-up project. AARP grants, they have a couple of different grants. The Community Challenge grant is currently available. The deadline is May 15th. It's going to be short time. You will find out in July whether you are approved, and you have to have the project done by November. So it's something that you want to try, something that you can implement very quickly. I can't remember how much money it is, but I know the village of Middleburg received one of these, and they put up some tables in one of their parks with like chessboards on them to get people to come out and use the parks. America Walks has the American Walks Walking College. They do webinars. You can have them come out and do some technical assistance. They also have community change grants. Applications typically come out in the fall with the December award, and you'll have a short period of time to do some work that will increase physical activity within your community. New York Bicycle Coalition has some workshops. They do some for free on a first come, first served basis, with support from NYSERDA and New York State Department of Health. I know that we had the opportunity to bring them into some communities. I asked the communities where I'm working if they wanted that, and nobody jumped at it, so all the free ones were taken. But some of my colleagues around the state have them coming in the next couple of weeks. And they're going to be doing some virtual trainings right now. Walk audits are something that we can easily do, and I have shared resources with what to do on a walk audit. Having lots of different people involved, including people with disabilities, elderly. If you don't have somebody with a disability, having a wheelchair, having a walker, having crutches, that participants can try and see what it's like to get around your community. A parent with a stroller, having youth, having planners, having somebody from DOT, elected officials, community businesses and organizations, having lots of different community groups represented, having low-income people who need to walk all the time are good people to invite to your walk audit. And when you're doing your walk audit, you're going to walk around the community. You're going to look at what are the sidewalks like? What are the intersections like? Are there intersections that people feel are too dangerous to cross? What's going to bring people to this area? Is it mixed use? Are there stores there? Do people feel safe? Is this a route to get to a park or a school? If there's a school there, what does drop off and pickup look like at the school? Is it safe for kids to walk? What can we do? Are these roads that you would feel safe to walk on or bicycle on? Can you get where you want to go? What are some of the destinations? Where's the grocery store, the doctor's office, the post office? Those are places that people walk to frequently. What are suggestions that people want to make? Is there signage? You know, Martha asked about signage from the parking areas. There's a really nice idea now for wayfinding signage that instead of using it's 2 miles away, says it's a 20-minute walk or a 10-minute bike ride. People don't realize how close things are. And when you say a mile, there's, oh, a mile's too far. But a mile is really a 15 to 20-minute walk for most people. That's a walkable distance. So if we can put, instead of mileage, how long it's going to take to walk or bike somewhere, we're probably going to encourage people to walk or bike those distances. Also, are there bike racks by businesses so that somebody who's biking through a community can lock their bike up and go to the restaurant and get something to eat, or run into the store to buy a bike repair kit because, gee, they've got a flat tire or they need a bottle of water. How do we encourage bicyclists to come into our communities? How do we attract businesses to come into our communities? Again, if we get people walking, we're going to get a lot more foot traffic into these businesses. So I said I had a picture of the impact. So from before COVID-19, this is the city of Los Angeles, and we can see the smog. Since we've been at home, the smog is disappearing, and we're not going to see such a dramatic impact in our communities as Los Angeles is, because they are such a car-centric city, but we are going to see an impact on our environment. And I think it is worth pointing out that if we can get people out of cars, not only will it impact the environment, but it's going to impact the economics of our community, the health of our community, the safety of our community, the ability for our older residents to stay within their community and be able to access things. And it will work on being accessible for everybody. For the first time in like 30 years, we're seeing our young adult teenage population not looking to get their driver's license. And we're seeing huge reductions in the percentage of kids who are getting their driver's license and are looking to rely more on walking and biking. So, I think we need to start looking at more walkable communities. And I think as we do that, we'll see the value of our homes going up. We'll see businesses looking to come into our communities, and see an economic revitalization. And we'll also maybe see taxes go down because we don't need to spend as much on Medicaid, because we're improving the health of our communities. So, questions?